Hello and welcome to Calvin's Garage. Just a fair warning, all I'm going to be doing today is talking. I'm not going to be doing any work. Right now I am preparing to replace the head gasket on my truck, my 1952 REO M-35. So I wasn't planning on making a video, but I was going to I've been going through the engine manual for my truck, looking at photos of the engine bay that I've taken, reading the operator's manual, things like that, preparing to work on this truck. I tend to do a lot of preparing like this, and so I figured why not film it to get a better idea of how I prepare to do different jobs. So I like to go in trying to know everything, being able to predict what is going to go on, what's going to happen. I really like to have everything all prepared and to know exactly what I'm doing. Unfortunately, when working on cars, some unexpected things come up and you don't always know, you can't always prepare, but I like to be as prepared as possible, so I just figured I would run through sort of what I'm thinking, because I'm already doing this anyway, thinking about what steps I need to take, what tools I need, what possible things could go wrong. So as long as I'm doing this anyway, I may as well film it for those of you who might want to understand how I am able to do these projects. This is the engine manual. This is a reproduction. I got it on eBay, and I have to say it is a really nice reproduction. Really nice reprint. I was very nervous about buying this engine manual because with some reprints the pages get fuzzy, they aren't aligned properly, some pages are missing, some pages are cut off, but with this everything is perfectly clear, it's perfectly readable, and it's great. Unfortunately I can't remember the name of the seller of this book, but they do a nice job. The first page that I've opened this up to is all the engine data. So engine make and model, of course, it's a REO OA331, 331 cubic inch inline 6. Most of this information isn't very useful for what I'm doing right now. But one thing to keep in mind, so the weight of the engine with all accessories is 872 pounds. That's an interesting thing to know, to be aware of. And then the weight of the complete power plant, that is the engine and the transmission connected together, that is 1,145 pounds. So those weights are very important to recognize, because if you need to make sure that if you're using an engine hoist for this, that it's rated for the proper weight. So the next page shows you, normally in the military, they would remove the engine and transmission all connected together, and they would just remove it all and put it on this rotisserie here, and from there they could feel free. From there they were free to work on it, take whatever they needed to take off, and that. I don't have one of these, and with the weight of the engine, it'd probably be a pain to pull the engine and transmission from that in order to replace the head gasket. And with the head gasket's location, it's fairly easy to get to, so I will not be removing the engine. I will be working on it with the engine still installed. So now it talks about disassembling the power plant. Now pretty much this manual tells you to remove everything. It's step by step. First you remove the radiator, then you remove the crankcase breather, then the carburetor. It basically tells you to remove everything in that order. I am not going to do that. My plan, looking through this manual, is to try and figure out what we actually need to remove and what we can leave in place. The engine manual calls for pretty much the complete disassembly of the engine, and then you fix what you need to, and then reassembly. It calls for removing the carburetor, but I don't think we need to remove the carburetor from these studs here. I believe that it can be taken off along with this manifold, and as long as we disconnect all the things that the carburetor is connected to, such as the throttle cable, the air line, the fuel line, things of that nature. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 bolts to remove the intake and exhaust manifold, and then 3 bolts there to disconnect it from the rest of the exhaust. So that shouldn't be too difficult as long as those bolts are, as long as we are able to take those bolts off. If those bolts are stuck, it's going to be a lot harder. So we have to take that off, and then there's these nuts on the valve cover. Those 2 nuts would have to be removed. So here's a picture of my truck. So again, all these things that are attached to the carburetor would have to be removed, but I think the carburetor can stay right where it is and just be removed with the intake and exhaust manifolds. Here are the 2 nuts on the valve cover. So you remove those 2 nuts and then you just lift up the valve cover. Now the other thing that we would need to remove is this piece here, which the coolant flows through. Now, it's a good thing we're removing it anyway because it also leaks. There's a coolant leak back here. So when we remove it, we will replace the gaskets and take care of that coolant leak. So we will lose a little bit of coolant, but we don't have to remove the radiator, so we don't have to drain the entire coolant system if we don't want to. The distributor. The engine manual calls for removing the distributor, but I think we can work around it. One important thing, this does not have an overhead cam. It has overhead valves, but the valves are operated through push rods, and the camshaft is actually inside the engine block. Therefore, we don't have to worry about any of the timing. So as long as we don't remove the distributor, then none of the timing will be messed up. This is going to be really good because it means we don't have to worry about messing up the timing. We don't have to retime it. We don't have to do any of that. And so that is really good. So I mentioned that there is push rods. After we take the valve cover off, and unfortunately there's no good picture of it, when you take the valve cover off, there are these rockers that are pushed up by the push rods and then depress or press down on the valves. Those rockers are connected by a rod, and that rod will have to be removed as part of the cylinder head bolt. So that those rockers will just be removed. That seems easy enough. It should only be like 4 bolts for the rocker arms. Now, for these push rods, there is a push rod cover on the side of the engine with the distributor. Now, you can see here, this is where the distributor goes. It sits down in there. So it kind of covers up that push rod cover. But I think, looking at where the bolt holes are, I believe that we can, as long as we can take off those bolts without taking off the distributor, we should be able to lift the push rod cover out to be able to take off these push rods. The push rods need to come out because they're halfway in the block and halfway in the head. And so those need to be removed, otherwise we risk bending them when we take the head off. So here's a view of the bottom of the head. You can see where the water goes, these expansion plugs which help to seal up the head, and then you can see where the cylinder head bolts go. There's 14 cylinder head bolts. So that's just 14 bolts. Hopefully none of them are stuck. So we can just remove those 14 bolts and then the head will lift off. We don't have to worry about this piece because we don't have to remove any of the valves, at least not yet. We aren't rebuilding the head, we are simply replacing the gasket. So here is an exploded view of the cylinder head. But we have all the gasket material. We have the head gasket and it's already pre-cut. And then these other gaskets, we will have to cut them out once we remove the old gasket so we can see what size it is. Same with the valve cover gasket. We have the material, we just need to cut the gasket out. Now this is what I was talking about right here where the push rods are attached. The push rods are labeled LL and only one of them is shown, but basically they're all connected together and use 2 of the cylinder head bolts in order to secure them. So the push rods, we just undo those 2 bolts and lift off the push rods, and then we undo the rest of the 12 other cylinder head bolts. Now the cylinder head bolts, that might pose a problem because there are actually different sizes of cylinder head bolt, different lengths. My plan is to use cardboard and actually sketch out this cylinder head configuration and place the bolts through the cardboard at their proper place. That keeps track of all of the bolts. So once we take off all the cylinder head bolts, we can lift up the cylinder head and replace the gasket. This manual is also good for giving us the torque specifications. Cylinder head bolts, torqued to 100 to 105 pound-feet of torque, or foot-pounds. But other than that, I thought it was much easier to try to remove the cylinder head while it's in the truck. After all, there's plenty of room to work in this engine bay. I didn't feel like removing the radiator and removing the engine and transmission altogether, especially because I wasn't sure if the engine hoist that we have could handle it as far as the weight goes. I don't remember what that engine hoist is rated for. Also, I didn't know if the engine hoist was actually tall enough to reach this engine. So I hope that video wasn't too boring. I just wanted to give you an idea of sort of the behind the scenes work that I do when I'm preparing to work on a project. I want to make sure that I have all the necessary information, that I actually know what I'm doing, that I have contingency plans in place in case what I'm doing doesn't work. I want to know what kinds of tools I need, what problems I might expect, any help that I'll need, and the like.